The Evening Star, July 28, 1919. Shots by Negro renew clash of races in Chicago. Fires at wagon load of white workmen. Battle follows attempt to disarm him. Police quell riot and arrest precipitator. No one hurt. Disorders of Sunday result in 2 deaths. Injuries to many. By the Associated Press, Chicago, July 28. Trouble between whites and Negroes was renewed in Chicago's Black Belt today, when Moses Thomas, a Negro, fired several shots at a wagon load of white workmen being taken to a South Side factory. When an attempt was made by whites to disarm Thomas, a dozen Negroes rushed his assistance. The police quelled the disturbance and reported that nobody had been injured. Big crowds gather. The disturbances occurred on Wentworth Avenue between 35th and 37th Streets, where many Negro workmen reside. A riot call was sent to the Deering Street Police Station, but when a wagon load of patrolmen arrived on the scene, the fighting was over. Hundreds of white men and Negroes were gathered in groups on the sidewalk, and Patrolman Philip Groke had Thomas in custody. The police dispersed the crowds and withdrew. Police today said they have been unable to find any trace of the unidentified white boy reported drowned yesterday in Lake Michigan at the foot of 29th Street during the race disturbances. 50 mounted police and 100 patrolmen have been assigned to guard the Negro district, while 500 policemen were held in reserve at South Side stations ready for immediate service in the event of further disturbances. Will search for weapons. The patrolmen were instructed to search all Negroes for firearms and to prevent whites and blacks from congregating in groups of more than 3 persons. Coroner Peter M. Hoffman, in opening the inquest over the unidentified Negro boy who was drowned in yesterday's disturbances, announced he would make a thorough investigation of the entire affair. These things have happened in Chicago before, and I think it is time that drastic measures were adopted by the authorities to prevent a repetition of yesterday's disgraceful scenes, said Coroner Hoffman. 2 killed Sunday. Race rioting late yesterday resulted in the death of 2 Negroes and the injury of perhaps 50 or more whites and blacks, including 4 patrolmen. Account of the origin of the trouble differ, but the version accepted by the police today is that the fighting started at the 29th Street bathing beach, where the whites and colored people are accustomed to swim in Lake Michigan, although the 2 races are separated by an imaginary line. This version of the affair says that a Negro boy on a raft crossed the boundary line and that white boys threw stones, knocking the colored lad into the water. He was said to have been drowned. A general fight developed between the races, and riot calls brought hundreds of police into the colored district, the center of which is around 31st and State Streets, more than a mile from the beach. Negroes asked the police to arrest a white boy, and when he refused, the Negroes began to beat the white lad. Colored bathers from another beach at 25th Street, attracted by the fighting, came in force to the rescue, and soon stones and clubs were hurled in all directions, many people, both white and black, being injured by the missiles. More trouble occurs. After the fighting near the beach had been quelled, trouble broke out further west near the center of the colored district. John O'Brien, a policeman, was attacked by a mob at 29th and State Streets after he had tried to rescue a fellow policeman from a crowd of Negroes. Several shots were fired in his direction, and he was struck in the arm. He drew his revolver and fired into crowd, 3 colored men being hit, one of whom died later in a hospital. After the police reserves had dispersed the crowds along State Street and other parts of the thickly populated colored district, whites from other parts of the city dragged Negroes from street cars and beat them severely in several instances during the night. But according to police records today, only 2 fatalities resulted from the rioting. The policemen who were injured, with the exception of O'Brien, who was hit in the arm by a bullet, suffered only bruises from stones and clubs. The 2 colored men who were shot at 29th Street, where one was killed, are said to be seriously, though not fatally, wounded. Many stray shots were heard during the night, and the police answered 2 riot calls early today, but their services were not required in either instance. Trouble previously. It is estimated that there are close to 150,000 Negroes in Chicago, nearly 50,000 of whom were drawn here during the last 3 or 4 years by the attractive wages in shops and factories engaged in manufacturing war materials. Virtually all of the Negroes live on the south side of the city, and many have acquired property in desirable neighborhoods occupied by the whites. This has led to many minor clashes between the races, and in a number of instances, in recent months, bombs have been exploded in buildings occupied by Negroes.
New York Tribune. July 28, 1919. Race riots break out in Chicago. 1 dead, many hurt. Mob drowns Negro at 29th Street Beach, where fight starts as blacks are pelted with pebbles. Clashes continued on the south side. Entire city police force is on duty. Chief says situation is in hand. Chicago, July 27th. A series of riots in the Negro district late today resulted in the drowning of 1 Negro, the reported drowning of a white man, probable fatal injury of another Negro, the wounding of a policeman, and injury to a score of whites and blacks by bullets or missiles. Police tonight said they had the situation well in hand. The trouble started at the 29th Street Beach, where whites and blacks are segregated, and soon spread to State Street, and the main thoroughfare in the heart of the Negro district, which extends about 5 miles. Shooting started near the beach. There was also some shooting in the vicinity of State Street. Although ill feeling between whites and blacks on the south side has extended over a period of months, emphasized by bomb explosions, some shooting, and numerous fights, today's riots seem to have had their start in petty quarreling at the beach. Started by pelting pebbles. Reports that Negroes wandered across the dividing line to the white section of the beach, and that whites amused themselves by throwing small stones at Negro bathers appeared the most plausible cause. Soon after the fighting started, a Negro fled, pursued by a number of whites. He took shelter behind a building and began shooting at a policeman who had joined the pursuit and who returned the fire. The Negro finally surrendered. During the fight, 1 Negro probably was fatally wounded. 29th Street was soon packed with whites and blacks, the latter predominating. More fighting occurred, and a few shots were fired as some of the Negroes fled, and patrol wagons loaded with police reserves raced to the scene. A fire broke out in a small building, and fire apparatus was blocked by the throngs. Negroes are said to have tried to drag the firemen from their seats. Rock fights numerous during the fighting. Rocks, bricks, and other missiles were hurled, both at the beach and at various points along 29th Street and along State Street. White men were frequently attacked and beaten on State Street, the police said. At the beach, while missiles were flying, a Negro on a raft was reported to have been struck with a rock and hurled into the lake. Later, the body of a Negro was taken from the water. A white man, a swimmer, also was residential ported, hit, and drowned. With the police stations emptied of reserves and scores of others rushed from North and West Side stations, Acting Chief of Police Alcock ordered every available policeman on duty to prevent further outbreaks. The small army of policemen succeeded in bringing about a fair semblance of order. Late tonight, the streets of the districts where disorders occurred were still fairly well filled with people, but police kept the crowds moving and no further trouble was expected. Another Negro may die. Police were unable to make an estimate of the number injured because in the many skirmishes names of injured could not be learned. Late hospital reports showed 1 Negro probably fatally wounded, another slightly wounded, and a policeman shot in the shoulder. 4 other persons, including 1 white woman, were injured by missiles. A rifle bullet fired by a Negro grazed the forehead of a white man sitting at the upper window of his home. He fell out the window, but was only slightly injured. The Negro, according to spectators, had leveled the rifle at a policeman, but a bystander struck the weapon upward. The Negro escaped. The Negro district has been steadily increasing in recent years with the influx of Southern Negroes who came to work in big industrial plants. Their encroachment on white neighborhoods caused considerable trouble and, during the last year, many clashes. Negroes have charged that a number of bomb explosions in the district in recent months were directed against families of their race by white neighbors. The Black Belt, as it is known in police circles, now comprises approximately 25 square miles and includes only a comparatively few small white settlements.
The Arizona Republican, July 28, 1919. 3 killed, many injured as whites and blacks clash. Race rioting develops in Chicago Sunday, said to be the result of bomb outrages in Negro District. Republican AP, Least Wire, Chicago, July 27th. Serious rioting of white and blacks in the Negro District of Chicago broke out this afternoon, and before midnight 2 men were dead. According to police reports, both drowned, 2 Negroes probably fatally wounded, and more than a score, possibly 50 persons, both blacks and whites, wounded or injured by bullets, stones, clubs, and other missiles. 50 or more arrests were made, and every available policeman was rushed into the Black Belt. The casualty list, reported by the police, included a Negro youth who was drowned in Lake Michigan and a white boy also drowned. The Negro's body was recovered. A white youth was arrested in connection with the drowning of a Negro. The latter is said to have been struck with a stone and fell from a raft floating off the 29th Street bathing beach, where the first serious trouble started. Stones were thrown at bathers on both sides of the color line, as whites and blacks are segregated at the beach. 29th Street soon was seething, fighting mass of humanity of both colors. Revolvers, knives, stones, clubs, and bricks were used. Riot call after riot call was received by the police, and patrol wagons loaded with bluecoats rushed to the district. Negroes at home on State Street, in the heart of the Black Belt, beat whites promiscuously through the day and night. Whites went about dragging Negroes from street cars and beating them. The trouble moved from one part of the Negro district to another. Hundreds of policemen were rushed to the troubled neighborhoods and succeeded in keeping the disorder scattered. Chicago, July 27th. Fighting between blacks and whites in a Negro district in the south side of the city this afternoon resulted in shooting in which one policeman was wounded and several other persons were injured. Every available policeman was rushed to the district. While fighting was promiscuous on South State Street in the Colored District, which extends about 5 miles along that thoroughfare, another riot occurred at the 29th Street beach. 2 Negroes were reported to have been drowned after being struck by missiles. White men were frequently attacked on State Street, the police said. Besides the policeman, a Negro was seriously wounded. 4 other persons, including one white woman, were injured by stones and bricks, none seriously. The immediate cause of the rioting was not known accurately early tonight, but for months bad feeling between blacks and whites has resulted in bomb explosions, fights, and neighborhood skirmishes. The bombs were generally believed to have been the result of ill feeling where Negroes moved into white neighborhoods. Negroes have charged that some bombs were set off by whites. The chief disturbances today occurred in localities where the Negroes greatly outnumber the whites. It was believed the police had the situation in hand. 1 Negro was drowned. A white man was reported drowned. 1 Negro probably fatally wounded, a policeman wounded, and nearly a score of whites and blacks injured by bullets or missiles in a series of riots in the Negro district this afternoon. The trouble started at the 29th Street beach, where whites and blacks are segregated and spread into the Negro district. Although ill feeling between whites and blacks on the south side has extended over a period of months, emphasized by bomb explosions, some shooting, and numerous fights, today's riots seem to have had their start in petty quarreling at the beach. Soon after the fighting started, a Negro fled, pursued by a number of whites. A policeman joined the pursuit. The Negro took shelter behind a building and began shooting at the policeman, who returned the fire. The Negro then surrendered. During the fight, 1 Negro was probably fatally wounded in the abdomen. The fighting soon had 29th Street packed with whites and blacks, the latter predominating. More fighting occurred, and a few more shots were fired, and some of the Negroes fled, and as patrol wagon after patrol wagon appeared on the scene with their loads of bluecoats. A fire broke out in a small building, and fire apparatus was blocked by the throngs. The Negroes are said to have attempted to drag the firemen from their seats. Further fighting ensued. During the fighting, rocks, bricks, and other missiles were hurled. White men frequently were attacked and beaten on State Street, the police said. At the beach, while missiles were flying, a Negro on a raft was reported to have been struck with a rock and hurled into the lake. Later, the body of a Negro was taken from the water. A white man, a swimmer, also was reported hit and drowned. With the police stations emptied of reserves and scores of others rushed from North and West Side stations, Acting Chief of Police Alcock ordered every available policeman on duty to prevent further outbreaks. The small army of bluecoats succeeded in bringing about a fair semblance of order in the Black District, although the Negroes were in bad temper. Late tonight, no further serious rioting was reported, though crowds still were on the streets. Hospital reports showed 1 Negro shot through the abdomen, probably fatally, another slightly wounded, and a policeman shot in the shoulder. For other persons, including 1 white woman, were injured by missiles, none seriously. One white man was sitting in an upper window of his home on 29th during the height of the excitement when a Negro attempted to shoot a policeman with a rifle which the Negro was carrying wrapped in paper. The weapon was struck upward and its ball grazed the window watcher's forehead, and he fell from the window. He was but slightly hurt. The Negro escaped.
Grand Forks Herald, July 29, 1919. 25 persons killed in Chicago riots. Several deaths caused in fight early today. Hundreds are injured. Fierce battle in center of downtown district. Most serious fight takes place in jail when blacks overpower guard. Latest reports show that the situation is somewhat improved. Chicago, Illinois, July 29th. Conditions in the race riot district were reported improved at a conference held by Governor Loudon, Mayor Thompson, and Adjutant General Dixon at 12:30 p.m. today. General Dixon, after a tour of the South Side, reported that rioting was slowly subsiding and that the immediate use of state troops would not be necessary. 50 patrolmen were withdrawn from the Black Belt and assigned to their regular duty in the Loop District. All the officials united in an attempt to soothe Chicago's social torment of race rioting complicated by a complete streetcar strike. The death list of whites and Negroes had reached 25 at noon. Even that figure was approximate, as unconfirmed reports of additional killings were received at police stations. Centers in Black Belt. The fighting today centered mainly in the heart of the Black Belt along 35th Street. And to cope with the situation, the police reopened the old Stanton Avenue police station abandoned about a year ago and made it their headquarters. Massing reserves of men, rifles, patrol wagons, ambulances, and motorcycles in the vicinity. Some 4,000 state troops were under arms in the city, and as many more were under orders to be ready for emergency. There were 2 dangerous flare-ups, however, as far south as 51st and State Streets, and 3 vicious fights took place in the downtown district on Wabash Avenue in broad daylight. Governor Loudon, Adjutant General Dixon, Chief of Police Garrity, Mayor Thompson, and Coroner Peter Hoffman strove steadily to restore law and order in the Negro district and prevent spread of the general rioting to other sections of the city. Appeal to citizens. The Adjutant General and members of his staff conferred with the city officials and then toured the riot district with the Chief of Police and the Mayor's secretary. Both Mayor Thompson and Governor Loudon issued appeals to citizens of all degrees and shades to aid the authorities in restoring peace. General Dixon said, "I found the situation improving throughout the danger districts. The police are better distributed than yesterday and last night, and better protection is being accorded. The police seem to have the situation very well in hand, and we hope that the worst is over." Serious riot in jail. Perhaps the most serious rioting of the day occurred in the Cook County Jail when 100 Negro prisoners exercising outside their cells overpowered a Negro guard and raced into the exercise room of the white prisoners. There were between 600 and 700 white prisoners in the room. When the Negroes rushed into the room, there was an instant clash. The regular force of guards was unable to control the prisoners and, rather than attempt to quiet them, locked the doors and appealed for aid. The prisoners fought for an hour before they were beaten into submission with clubs. Several of the Negroes, it was reported, carried knives, and a number of white prisoners are said to have been seriously wounded. Harold Rignadell, white, was riddled by bullets fired from a house at 1021 South State Street and killed him. When the police rushed the place, they found and arrested 4 women and 9 men, all Negroes. 2 revolvers, 2 razors, and a quantity of cartridges were discovered piled near a window from which the Negroes had been shooting. 24 killed. Chicago, July 29th. The police list of riot fatalities rose to 24 at 10:30 a.m. today when Thomas Joshua, Negro, was killed by a detective who fired into a crowd of rioters on the South Side, and when B.F. Hardy, Negro, died at a hospital. List of killed: Allenberg, Alec, Negro; Baker, Henry, Negro; Capel, Eugene, white; Dillon, August, Negro; Dedrick, white; Gentle, Eugene, white; Giller, Edward S., white; Hefferman, Emmett, white; Kazaram, Casper, white; Marks, David, white; Mills, John, white; Powers, Joseph, white; Sunberg, Alex, white; Simpson, John, Negro; Roberts, Charles, Negro; Warnick, Nick, white; Joshua, Thomas, Negro; Hardy, Ben F., Negro; Crawford, James, Negro; Cleanmark, Nicholas, white; Lazarane, Mer, white. 2 unidentified Negroes. 1 unidentified white man. Rignadell, Harold, white. Trouble in jail. Chicago, July 29th. A vicious race fight broke out in the county jail shortly after 11 o'clock. The whites outnumbered the blacks, and the guards were swept aside when they tried to stifle the trouble at its start. 4,000 soldiers stand ready to quell riots between Negroes and whites in Chicago. Weapons of every description brought into play. Negroes raced through street in automobiles. Whites unmercifully beat restaurant porters. Chicago, July 29th. 4,000 soldiers with full war equipment stood ready today to quell the race rioting between Negroes and whites that during 2 nights of terror in the South Side Black Belt cost the lives of at least 22 men. Men, including 1 Negro policeman, and the injury of hundreds of others, many seriously and possibly a dozen fatally. 4 of the injured are soldiers. The police and the coroner have been unable to make a complete check of the casualty, but reports showed over 20 killed last night. Many weapons used. 100,000 Negroes and an equal number of whites either fought in the streets and alleys or cowered in their homes while shots were fired. Mounted policemen galloped along the boulevards. Patrol wagons dashed through the streets with prisoners and wounded. Women and children screamed as men fought with cudgels, knives, and fists. When the rioting, which started Sunday night with the stoning and drowning of a Negro who had drifted on a raft into the water of a beach used by whites, broke out afresh last night, Mayor Thompson asked Governor Loudon for troops. The governor, who was on his way to Lincoln, Nebraska, turned back at Burlington, and Acting Governor Oglesby gave Adjutant General Dixon orders to mobilize necessary soldiers. By midnight, 4 regiments were in armories on the south side, but by that time the police had cleared the streets for the night and began collecting the dead and injured and rounding up loiterers. An old grievance. The taste of blood Sunday night whetted the appetites of hundreds of adventurous persons who had long grieved at the rapid infiltration of Negroes who have spread over a large territory formerly constituting a fine residential quarter of the South Side. Property had decreased in value, and whites had emigrated to other parts of the city by thousands, but many others had clung to their homes while the streets and one of the large parks became thronged with Negroes. Both parties to the contest, enraged by stories of the cruelties of the other during Sunday night's melee, deliberately armed themselves last night and went out to stalk their prey. As soon as darkness fell, the fighting in various forms became fierce. In some cases, Negroes in automobiles dashed through the streets, firing at any whites encountered. In other cases, Caucasians attacked the buildings occupied by Ethiopians, shooting through windows and doors while the inmates fired back from barricades. Bands of both races marched through the streets and meeting, fought battles that ceased only when the pavement was covered with dead and wounded, or the mounted police had sparred their horse through the mass. Hand-to-hand fights. Many individual fights, hand-to-hand struggles with knives and razors added to the casualties. Men and women were dragged from street cars until the companies stopped running the vehicles through the affected area. In one instance, a band of whites passing a mansion on Grand Boulevard and resenting the occupancy of the place by blacks was fired on from the house. As the night wore on and the bands of terrorists were broken up by the policemen, looters and incendiaries appeared. Several houses were fired and one was burned. A number of stores were broken open and sacked. Toward daylight, the less aggressive, having been driven to cover, worn out with fighting or jailed. A number of white rioters invaded the downtown quarter, beat Negroes found on the street, and dragged cowering porters from all-night restaurants and hotels to the streets, flogging them unmercifully. Car conductor killed. Chicago, July 29th. Joseph Powers, white, a streetcar conductor, was shot and instantly killed soon after daylight in the Stockyards section. William Henderson, a Negro, was arrested on suspicion in connection with the killing.
The Lake County Times, July 29, 1919. Bloodlust reigns. Race riots wax. 31 dead, 500 wounded. War reaches Loop District. 4 new dead this AM. Horrible acts committed in all parts of Chicago. Bulletin. International News Service. Springfield, Illinois, July 29th. As news reached here this morning of continued race riot disturbances in Chicago, word was received at the Adjutant General's office that Adjutant General Frank S. Dixon was sending telegrams from Chicago to National Guard Company commanders throughout the state requesting them to be prepared for immediate call to service. The commanders are asked to organize their companies and hold them in readiness for call. Instructions were dispatched to the 9th and 10th Regiments of the National Guard and the 5th and 6th Regiments of the Illinois Reserve Militia, who will augment the 9th Regiment, already under arms in Chicago, if necessary. By Staff Correspondent, Chicago, July 29th. 29 dead were reported by police stations, hospitals, and the coroner today, and others were dying among the estimated 500 wounded, as race riots that began Sunday among Negroes and whites on the South Side spread to the heart of the business district early today. 9 new deaths and at least 50 injured were added to the grim toll of the disturbances as the result of fresh outbreaks in the early hours today. Before 8 o'clock, 4 new deaths and a score of wounded have been added to the grim toll which the rioting of the past 48 hours has taken. Mobs' lust for blood. Before the sun was up this morning, mobs of white men were gathering in the downtown business district muttering, "Let's treat the Negroes as they are treating white folks out on the South Side." One of the first demonstrations occurred at the Federal Building, where hundreds of Negroes are employed. A mob gathered there, and Negroes who could hear the howling mob appealed for protection. Expect militia today, with the situation admittedly growing hourly more alarming. Governor Frank O'Loden returned hurriedly to the city and offered the mayor and the chief of police the service of 4,000 militiamen for instant military duty. Adjutant General Frank S. Dixon, after an inspection, reported the troops ready for immediate action. Veterans of the police force declared that the militia would have to be called out before nightfall, and that troops would have to be used to guard the downtown business streets. "Bring the militia into the loop," cried one of the officers. "If they don't, there will be a massacre on State Street." Mob rioting downtown. At this time, a mob of 1,500 men, some of the soldiers and sailors in uniform, had been rioting for more than 3 hours in the downtown section. As a result, 1 white man and 1 Negro had been shot to death and a dozen beaten, mauled, and stabbed. From the South Side, where residents underwent a night of flaming terror, reports of fresh fighting between the races had been received. A Negro cut the throat of Joseph Powers, a streetcar conductor, early today, and Powers died as a policeman arrived. William Henderson, colored, was arrested for the crime. White man stabbed. An unidentified white man was found stabbed to death at Vincennes Avenue and East 43rd Street. There were 5 knife wounds in his head and chest. An unidentified Negro was shot and killed by the mob at Adams and Waugh. Continued on page 2. Extra. International News Service. Chicago, July 29th. Furious rioting between Negro and white prisoners in the county jail. Street fighting in the heart of the city and throughout the South Side Negro section. And a barricaded house, turned into an ambush for the whites today, brought the roll of the racial feud, which begun Sunday, to the grim total of 31 dead and more than 500 wounded, many of them seriously. Of those killed, 16 were white men and 15 were Negroes. Officials in conference, as the reports of shootings, stabbings, and killings poured in. Mayor William Hale Thompson and Governor Loden went into conference to discuss the situation, particularly with reference to the possible need of troops to quell the race disturbances. Both the governor and the mayor earlier in the day issued proclamations appealing to the citizens, both white and black, to remain calm. Outbreak in jail. The outbreak in the county jail camp, when 175 Negro prisoners who had been herded together in the bullpen in preparation for the customary Visitors' Day, became enraged and attacked guards and attorneys who were visiting clients in the jail. With the walls of the jail echoing with the howling and cursing of the prisoners, the Negroes broke out of the bullpen and swept through the corridors of the jail, assaulting guards and white prisoners. Several guards and prisoners were badly beaten. Palmer House rushed. Additional guards armed with revolvers rushed the Negroes and gradually pressed them back into the bullpen. Another mob of whites in the downtown district rushed the Palmer House and shouted threats at Negroes employed in the basement. The police dispersed the mob without casualties. Meanwhile, 4,500 troops, equipped with rifles, waited in 2 armories. 100 taxicabs were on hand to rush them immediately to the scene of any disorder where they might be needed. Officials were hopeful this afternoon, however, that it would not be necessary to call out troops, although the situation admittedly is scarcely less serious than earlier in the day. Shot as he neared house. Harold Rignadell, the latest victim of the riots, was shot as he approached a house in which a number of Negroes were hiding. Police rushed to the dwelling and arrested 4 women and 9 men. The house was found to contain a large number of guns, axes, knives, razors, and other weapons, and 500 rounds of ammunition. Mrs. Kate Alder, one of the Negresses arrested, boasted that she had shot Rignadell.